They raised their champagne glasses under chandeliers I paid for, without ever realizing whose name was behind the lights, the music, the very walls around them. I'm Rachel Morgan. Years ago, my family told me I wasn't good enough to sit at their table. Last night, they toasted their own success inside a resort I built, and when the truth finally dropped, so did a few jaws. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to lift you up? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment and let's talk about it. The black envelope felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried all the years of judgment in its sealed flap. I found it resting on the marble counter of my kitchen, sitting there like an unwanted memory I couldn't avoid. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows of my Austin penthouse, casting long shadows across the polished wood floors. The city hummed below, alive with people who had no idea how tightly the past could still grip you, even when you thought you had outrun it. I stared at the envelope, fingers brushing the textured paper, reluctant to break its seal. My heart thudded with a familiar, unwelcome rhythm. The last family gathering played in my mind like an old film reel. Plastic smiles, whispered judgments, and a place for me near the kitchen doors, close enough to hear the dishes clatter, but far from any real conversation. Back then, I laughed it off, pretended it didn't hurt. But there's a particular kind of loneliness that sticks when you're seated at the edge of your own family. The wax seal cracked with a soft pop when I finally opened the envelope. Inside was an elegant invitation, silver script swirling across heavy cardstock. Morgan Family Reunion, May 20th, 2024 Everlight Resort, Napa Valley, California. Even the venue name felt like a sting. Everlight Resort. A name chosen by Jessica, no doubt, flaunting a sense of grandeur she hadn't earned. I could almost hear her voice dripping with pride, explaining how she had secured the most prestigious resort in Napa Valley, unaware, or maybe just unwilling to see, the truth about where that luxury came from. My thumb skimmed over the embossed lettering as I read it again, slower this time. For a moment, I considered tossing it straight into the trash. Let them have their polished gathering without me. After all, they had made it clear enough before that my absence wouldn't be mourned. But something inside me flickered, an ember I thought I had buried long ago. The invitation wasn't just a summons, it was a challenge. My phone buzzed sharply against the counter, pulling me from my thoughts. I picked it up and saw a new text message from Emily, my younger sister, the only one who had never fully turned her back on me. "You coming?" 2 simple words. No pressure, no judgment, just curiosity. Hope, maybe. I looked up, catching my reflection in the mirror across the room. A woman stared back, poised, successful, wrapped in soft cashmere and quiet confidence. But if you looked closely, closer than most ever bothered, you'd see the faint lines worry had etched at the corners of her eyes. You'd see the invisible scars that ambition and rejection had carved deep beneath the surface. They thought they still knew me, that I hadn't changed since the last time they decided I wasn't good enough to sit at their table. "If they think I'm still small enough to overlook," I murmured aloud, my voice steady even as my chest tightened, "they're about to get a lesson in perspective." I set the invitation down carefully, smoothing its creases, not because I cherished it, but because I intended to use it. The city outside continued its endless pulse, cars threading their way through downtown streets, people bustling along sidewalks, the distant chime of a bell from the corner cafe. In that moment, the weight of the envelope shifted. It no longer felt like a burden. It felt like an opportunity, a stage. And this time, I wouldn't be waiting for a seat at someone else's table. I didn't RSVP right away. I had a few preparations to make first. Building an empire doesn't start with blueprints. It starts with bruises. I learned that the hard way, in places most people never bother to glance at from their polished cars, backroad motels with flickering signs and threadbare carpets. In 2015, while my cousins posed for graduation photos under grand ivy arches, I was scrubbing soap scum off cracked tiles in a motel bathroom outside Waco. The mop was heavier than I expected, the air thick with the scent of bleach and resignation. I didn't mind. Every corner I cleaned, every towel I folded, I learned something the world wouldn't teach you in a business class. Patience, endurance, the art of noticing what people need before they ask. Back then, my family thought they knew the measure of success. Diplomas, internships at law firms, champagne brunches where they congratulated each other on becoming someone important. No one asked where I was. No one wondered why I wasn't clinking glasses at their tables. That first motel job wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and it led to others. By 2017, I had worked the front desk at a rundown inn, learned how to patch drywall at a roadside lodge, and watched owners cut corners until guests stopped coming. I took notes on everything, not just how they failed, but why. "You're too smart to stay here, girl," the old handyman told me once, pushing a busted vacuum down a hallway that smelled faintly of mildew. His voice was rough as sandpaper, but there was kindness buried in it. "Use this time. Learn it all." I did. In 2018, I scraped together everything I had: savings from endless night shifts, a tiny loan from a skeptical bank manager, and bought a derelict property on the outskirts of Fredericksburg. No one saw potential in it but me. The roof leaked, the carpets reeked, and half the toilets didn't flush right. But I saw past the grime. I saw a beginning. We called it the Willow Inn. We, meaning me and the 2 part-timers I could afford to hire, one of whom was a scrappy college dropout named Daniel Parker. He had sharp eyes, quick hands, and a habit of asking the right questions. I didn't realize then that Daniel would eventually become my right hand, the one person I trusted when the stakes grew too high to explain. The first year nearly broke me. Plumbing disasters soaked the first 3 months' profits. Guests complained about everything from the drafty windows to the lack of artisanal coffee pods. There were nights when I fell asleep on the lobby couch, waking up stiff and questioning whether the dream was even worth it. But failure, if you're willing to listen, teaches better than any textbook. I stopped trying to compete with the chain hotels. I leaned into something different. I tore up the old carpets and replaced them with reclaimed wood floors. I installed solar panels, partnered with local farms for breakfast supplies, hand-wrote welcome notes for every guest. Slowly, word spread. Travelers seeking something real, something thoughtful, found us. By 2020, the Willow Inn was not only profitable, but quietly making headlines on travel blogs. They called it an oasis of authenticity in a sea of sameness. I didn't correct them. In the fall of 2022, sitting at a folding table with Daniel and a few scrappy team members, I filed the paperwork to officially launch Everlight Hospitality Group. There were no champagne toasts, no polished speeches, just a few tired smiles and the knowledge that we had built something real, with our own hands, without a single ounce of approval from the people who had once written me off. That winter, I won a regional award for sustainable innovation in hospitality. They gave me a plaque, a handshake, and a polite round of applause. But the real trophy was waiting back home. The original room key from the Willow Inn, framed and hung behind my office desk. It wasn't much to anyone else. To me, it was everything. While they toasted trust funds, I was busy rewriting the rules they lived by. Revenge wasn't my goal. But a little poetic justice? That felt earned. From the 42nd floor of the Everlight headquarters in Austin, the city looked like a model you could rearrange at will. Skyscrapers glinted in the early summer sun, and the river coiled lazily through the city's heart. I leaned back in my chair, the soft hum of my office's ventilation system the only sound breaking the afternoon calm. Daniel Parker stood across the room, tablet in hand, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "So," he said, flipping the screen around so I could see. "Confirmed. Jessica booked the Celestia Resort for the reunion." The Celestia, one of Everlight's crown jewels, tucked into the vineyards of Napa Valley, a resort built not just for luxury, but for legacy. My legacy. I tapped my fingernail lightly against the edge of my desk, thinking back to how Jessica had once bragged at a Thanksgiving dinner about her impeccable taste in venues. She had no idea she was stepping directly into the house I had built, brick by invisible brick. I smiled, slow and deliberate, and let's make sure her experience matches her expectations. The next few days were a flurry of quiet preparation. I approved the final menu tasting, a 6-course farm-to-table spread showcasing Napa's finest. I hand-picked the scent diffused through the lobby, a soft blend of sea salt and fig, subtle but unforgettable. The ambient music was curated down to the last note, a playlist meant to feel effortless, yet refined. Even the floral arrangements were deliberate. White orchids, known for their quiet resilience, mixed with sprigs of rosemary, an old symbol of remembrance. Every detail, every choice was my message woven into the evening. You forgot me. I did not forget. Daniel kept pace without missing a beat, organizing the vendors, briefing the staff. We arranged for the guest experience reveal to happen halfway through the reunion, at the peak of their self-congratulation. A stage, a screen, a moment where truth would bloom into the room like a silent bomb. One afternoon, reviewing the final guest list, Daniel paused and raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, half serious. "You could just let them have their little party and walk away." I considered it. Briefly. The temptation to simply turn my back, to keep my success private, was strong. There's a dignity in silence, but there's also a quiet kind of justice in truth. I turned to face the panoramic window, watching the traffic blur into rivers of light. "The higher they lift their glasses," I said, smiling slightly, "the further they'll fall." Daniel chuckled and made a note on his tablet. "One standard queen room for Jessica Morgan. No upgrades, no frills, as requested." The irony of it made me chuckle too. Jessica would be tucked neatly into a room not much larger than the one I used to scrub clean. She would strut through the lobby, oblivious to the hands that had designed the marble floors she clicked across in her designer heels. By the time the bubbles burst in their flutes, so would their illusions. They toasted their own success under chandeliers I paid for. The grand ballroom shimmered in warm, golden light, each crystal dangling from the chandeliers, refracting soft glimmers across the polished marble floors. White orchids spilled from towering arrangements, their fragrance mingling with the faint scent of citrus that floated through the air. The buffet tables, draped in ivory linens, groaned under the weight of artisanal cheeses and delicate hors d'oeuvres. I stepped inside, heels clicking softly against the marble, and surveyed the scene like a visitor at a museum of forgotten faces. A large backdrop near the entrance displayed a glossy script, "Morgan Family Reunion 2024. Guests flocked there, grinning into the cameras, adjusting their jackets and pearl necklaces. Jessica stood near the center, her crimson dress clinging perfectly to her figure, radiating the kind of effortless confidence that came from never questioning if you belonged. No one noticed me at first, just the way it had always been. I moved along the edges of the room, careful, deliberate. From a distance, it all looked perfect. Laughter chimed like bells, champagne flutes clinked, and conversations bloomed around career promotions, new investments, children accepted into elite schools. Pride hung in the air thicker than the scent of orchids. For a moment, I flashed back. Another reunion, another room, years ago. I remembered standing awkwardly by the buffet, clutching a sweating glass of punch, smiling too widely when people brushed past with polite nods. I remembered the way Jessica had waved me over once, only to tuck me near the servers so I'd be out of the way. I remembered my father's stiff pat on the shoulder, more obligatory than affectionate. But tonight was different. They didn't seat me at the back. Tonight, there were no seats at all for me, no invitations to join the photo line, no warm embraces. Their eyes slid over me like oil on water, as if sensing something unfamiliar, unsettling. Jessica raised her champagne flute high, flashing her most dazzling smile. "To the Morgan legacy," she called, her voice bright and commanding. "To family, success, and the future ahead." The crowd erupted in agreement, glasses raised, a sea of polished pride. I noticed the slight tension in Jessica's smile when she spotted me holding a glass too. Elegant, crystal, identical to theirs. For a brief second, her polished mask slipped, just the tiniest crack, before she covered it with another gleaming laugh. I sipped quietly, savoring the dry sparkle of the champagne and the subtle bitterness that followed. Nearby, my father, Charles Morgan, nodded sagely, arms folded as he basked in the reflected glow of family achievement. He hadn't spoken to me yet. Neither had most of the others. A vibration buzzed against my hip. Discreetly, I pulled my phone from my clutch and glanced at the screen. "Emily, you look like a queen." I smiled to myself, a warmth flickering inside that even the frost in the room couldn't dim. Emily had always seen me, even when everyone else chose to look away. Across the ballroom, Daniel caught my eye. He stood by the sound booth, one hand resting casually on the equipment case, the other hovering near the tablet that would trigger the reveal. I nodded once, slow and sure. It was time. Tonight, I wasn't the outsider. I was the architect. The higher they raised their glasses, the faster they would fall. The lights dimmed gradually, softening the grandiosity of the ballroom into a muted hush. Conversations tapered off into curious whispers as guests turned toward the stage. I remained near the back, champagne flute still in hand, watching the show unfold as though I were both director and invisible audience. A large white screen rolled down behind the platform where Jessica had earlier led her triumphant toast. She stood near the front, still basking in the attention, her laugh lingering awkwardly as she realized no one was laughing with her anymore. The projector flickered to life. At first, it was subtle. Sweeping aerial views of pristine coastlines, mountain resorts nestled against snowy peaks, sunlit vineyards stretching for miles. The images shifted seamlessly, each property more breathtaking than the last, each bearing the Everlight insignia tucked discreetly into a corner of the frame. The crowd murmured appreciatively. A few recognized the resorts, whispering names to one another, admiring the sophistication of the places they had only seen in magazines or whispered about at fundraisers. Then the final slide appeared, bold and undeniable against the glowing backdrop. Proudly owned and operated by Rachel Morgan. For a moment, silence reigned. A fork clattered noisily against a plate. A champagne glass slipped from someone's hand, shattering on the marble floor in a crystalline gasp. Somewhere near the stage, Jessica's posture stiffened as if the words themselves had wrapped around her and squeezed. My father's face, usually unreadable, was frozen in a kind of stunned vacancy. The last time I had seen him look so unmoored was the day he told me, without hesitation, "No daughter of mine cleans rooms for a living." The irony tasted sweeter than any wine in the room. Jessica recovered first, though poorly. She let out a brittle laugh, waving a manicured hand as if dismissing the screen. "Well, that's adorable," she chirped, her voice a notch too high. "I'm sure it's just a fun coincidence." But the room didn't follow her lead. Heads were turning, eyes narrowing. People shifted uncomfortably, calculating, re-evaluating. Daniel, standing discreetly by the sound booth, gave a slight nod. My cue. I set down my untouched glass and stepped forward. My heels clicked purposefully across the marble, each step slicing through the charged silence. The sea of faces parted instinctively, unsure whether to welcome or retreat. I climbed the few steps onto the stage and stood beneath the towering screen, its light washing over me like a silent coronation. "Good evening," I said, my voice calm, unhurried. "I hope you've been enjoying the hospitality." A few half-hearted claps rippled, then died. I let the silence breathe before continuing. "While you measured success in invitations and inheritance," I said, sweeping the room slowly with my gaze. I built something real, and tonight, you're standing inside it. It wasn't anger that filled my voice. It wasn't bitterness. It was something stronger, steadier. The quiet certainty that comes from knowing your worth, whether or not anyone else chooses to see it. Jessica's face tightened, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish out of water. My father looked down at the floor, his hands clasped stiffly in front of him. No one moved. No one dared to. I let the moment settle, the truth heavy and undeniable. I hadn't humiliated them. I hadn't shouted or pointed fingers. I had simply turned on the light and in doing so, exposed the shallow spaces they had tried to pass off as home. For the first time in years, I felt untethered from their approval or their rejection. The applause didn't come from them. It came from inside me. Victory didn't taste like champagne. It tasted like peace. The city lights of Napa Valley shimmered in the distance as I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse suite. The murmur of the reunion had long since faded, leaving behind a quiet so complete it felt almost sacred. The polished floors reflected the muted glow of the chandeliers, and in my hand a single glass of deep red wine caught the faintest flicker of light. I let the silence settle around me, filling the spaces that once buzzed with expectation. There was a time, not so long ago, when I would have given anything for their approval. A seat at their table, a word of praise, a photo where I wasn't cropped out. Tonight, standing alone, I realized I no longer needed any of it. On the small side table near the window, an envelope waited. No gilded lettering this time, no heavy cardstock, just a simple hand-folded note in my father's unmistakable handwriting. Proud of you. Sorry it took me this long. I traced the words with my fingertips, feeling a strange ache in my chest. Not pain exactly, but something softer. Regret, perhaps, mingled with a quiet understanding. People rarely change all at once. Sometimes they just take longer to catch up to the truth you've been living. I folded the note carefully and tucked it into my journal. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't everything. But it was enough. A soft knock sounded at the door. Daniel stepped inside, tablet in hand, his expression as calm and steady as ever. "Not to rush your moment," he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, "but we have paperwork." I laughed quietly, the sound surprising even myself with how light it felt. "Of course we do," I said, setting my glass down. He handed me 2 slim folders. "Expansion proposals," he said. "New York, Paris." I skimmed the contracts, noting the careful details Daniel had highlighted, the opportunities, the risks, the sheer scope of what lay ahead. Just a few years ago, the idea of owning a single inn felt like reaching for the stars. Now those stars were becoming stepping stones. I uncapped the pen and signed the New York contract first, my signature flowing easily across the page. Paris could wait until morning. As Daniel gathered the paperwork, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was Emily. "You better sit at the head of the table next time," her message read, punctuated by a winking face I could practically hear in her voice. I smiled and typed back simply, "Maybe next time I'll build the table myself." Daniel lingered for a moment longer, giving me a quiet nod before letting the door click softly behind him. Alone again, I stepped out onto the balcony. The night air was cool against my skin, carrying the faint scent of grapevines and distant earth. I cradled my glass of wine in both hands and let my gaze drift over the sleeping valley. I remembered another night, years ago, sitting cross-legged on the cracked rooftop of a crumbling motel, looking up at the stars and daring to believe I could build something better. I had no audience then, no applause, just stubborn hope and an unshakable will. Some dreams, it turns out, don't need witnesses to come true. They didn't ban me from the family. They just freed me to build my own. Standing there on the balcony, watching the valley lights flicker against the dark, I understood something simple, yet profound. True victory isn't measured by applause, but by the quiet peace you carry within. Years ago, I had only a rooftop, a cracked sky, and a stubborn dream. Tonight I had something better. My own place in the world, earned without permission. In life, it's not the approval of others that defines us, but the way we hold on to hope when no one else believes. When we build with kindness, patience, and quiet strength, even the tallest walls of doubt can be replaced by bridges of understanding. Family isn't just where you come from. Sometimes it's what you create with your own hands. If this story touched a part of your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share your journey or a moment when you found your own quiet victory. I'm here, listening.